Some sentences outlive statistics. Some moments between two men on a baseball field stay in the memory longer than any number in any record book. 1974. Dave Winfield, Nolan Ryan. 3 strikeouts, 1 exchange. One sentence that Winfield carried for 30 years and eventually told a reporter, laughing but not entirely laughing, because the sentence was funny in the way that true things are sometimes funny. Not because they're jokes, but because the truth, stated plainly, has a quality that lands like a punch. What Ryan said to Winfield that day in 1974 was not complicated, was not philosophical, was not the kind of thing that requires analysis or interpretation. It was a simple statement of fact, and it revealed everything about who Nolan Ryan was, how he thought about the game, and why standing in a batter's box against him was an experience that nobody who did it ever fully forgot. Dave Winfield in 1974 was 22 years old and one of the most physically gifted athletes to enter professional baseball in a generation. 6 feet 6 inches tall, 220 pounds. Built like someone had taken the idea of an athlete and tried to make it literal. He had been drafted out of the University of Minnesota, not just by baseball teams, but by basketball teams and football teams simultaneously. The San Diego Padres, the Atlanta Hawks, the Utah Stars of the ABA, and the Minnesota Vikings all selected him in their respective drafts in 1973. He chose baseball, the Padres, and in 1974 he was in his first full major league season, learning what professional baseball required, discovering the difference between college competition and the daily relentless excellence of men who had been doing this since they were teenagers. He was talented enough that the learning curve was not steep. He was young enough that certain lessons had not yet arrived. The lesson about Nolan Ryan was one of them. Ryan in 1974 was at the peak of what would become the most statistically dominant period of his career. He had thrown 2 no-hitters the previous season, had broken Sandy Koufax's single-season strikeout record, was in the process of establishing himself not just as a very good pitcher, but as something that required a different category entirely. The California Angels had acquired him from the Mets in 1971, and in 3 seasons in California, he had become what New York had always hoped he might become: consistent, dominant, and genuinely terrifying to face. He was 27 years old in 1974. In his physical prime, throwing the fastball at speeds that radar technology of the era struggled to measure accurately, walking fewer batters than he had in New York, finding the control that had always been implicit in his talent, but that had taken the right environment to make explicit. He was, in 1974, the pitcher that everyone who had seen him throw his first major league pitch had always suspected was in there. When Winfield stepped into the batter's box against Ryan for the first time in 1974, he brought with him the confidence that 22 years old and extraordinary physical gifts tend to produce. He had faced good pitchers in his young career, had handled velocity before, had the bat speed and the strength to make contact with pitches that most hitters couldn't reach. He stood in against Ryan and took his stance and waited. The first pitch arrived. Ryan's fastball. Not the 100-mile-per-hour fastball of the stories. The stories were always slightly ahead of reality, but 95 with late movement, moving away from a right-handed hitter at the last moment. Winfield swung, missed. The catcher's mitt popped. The umpire called strike 1. Winfield stepped out of the box, stepped back in, told himself to wait longer, to let the ball get deeper. Standard adjustment. The kind you make automatically when the first pitch is faster than you expected. Second pitch. Ryan threw it again. Same speed, same location, slightly more movement. Winfield swung, missed again. Strike 2. He stepped out again. Something was different about this, about the way the ball moved at the end, about the way his timing, which was usually reliable, was arriving a fraction too early. Third pitch. Ryan changed speeds. The curveball that Winfield's timing, geared for the fastball, had no answer for. Strike 3. Winfield walked back to the dugout. Second at bat. Winfield made adjustments, told himself to sit on the breaking ball, to look for the curveball early, changed his approach. Ryan threw the fastball immediately, and Winfield, looking for the curve, was late. Strike one, then Ryan threw the fastball again, inside this time, moving toward Winfield's hands. The pitch that erases any advantage that bat speed provides because there is no room for the barrel to get through. Winfield fouled it back. Strike two. Ryan's catcher put down a sign. Ryan nodded, wound up, threw the curveball. The same curveball Winfield had been waiting for in the first at-bat, the one he had adjusted specifically to handle. It started at his eyes and broke to his knees, and Winfield swung through it completely. Strike three again. 2 at-bats. 2 strikeouts. Winfield was not a young man who became discouraged easily, but he was beginning to understand that this was different, that what Ryan was doing to him was not just better pitching, it was a different kind of problem than he had encountered before. 3rd at-bat. Winfield stood in the on-deck circle and watched Ryan carefully, watched his arm angle, his release point, the spot where the ball left his hand, tried to find the information that would give him something to work with in the box. He saw what everyone who had ever tried to solve Ryan saw. The release point was consistent, deceptively consistent. Every pitch came from the same angle, the same spot in Ryan's delivery, regardless of what the pitch was going to do. The fastball and the curveball left Ryan's hand looking identical until they didn't, until physics took over and the ball went where Ryan intended it to go. That was the problem. The information that hitters use to make decisions, the angle of release, the spin of the ball, the trajectory in the first 15 feet, was the same for every pitch. The differentiation happened too late for a human nervous system to respond. Winfield walked to the plate knowing more about Ryan's mechanics than he had known in the first 2 at-bats. It didn't matter. Ryan got ahead quickly, worked the count, and struck Winfield out for the 3rd time. Subscribe if you've ever faced something that made every adjustment feel useless. Hit like if you already know what Ryan said. And drop a comment. Who is the most unhittable pitcher you've ever watched? Because what happened when Winfield finally said something changed this story completely. Walking back to the dugout after the 3rd strikeout, Winfield did something that surprised even him. He stopped and turned toward the mound. Ryan was already looking at the next batter, already done with Winfield, already in the process of not thinking about him anymore. And that, the complete absence of attention, was what pushed Winfield to say something. He called out to Ryan, said something along the lines of, "How do you do that?" Not angry exactly, frustrated, but genuinely asking, the kind of question that comes from a young man who has encountered something he can't solve and wants, badly, to understand why. Ryan turned, looked at Winfield. The 2 men were looking at each other across the distance between the mound and the first baseline. Ryan said something, short, returned to his preparation. Winfield stood there for a moment, processing it, then walked the rest of the way to the dugout. What Ryan said, as Winfield told it decades later, was this: "I throw the ball, and you try to hit it. That's the whole thing." Winfield laughed telling it, said it took him a long time to understand what Ryan meant, that he'd thought about it for years, turned it over, looked at it from different angles, and eventually realized that Ryan wasn't being dismissive or arrogant, wasn't making a joke, was stating, with the precision of a man who had thought very carefully about what he did and why, the complete and total truth of the situation. The game between a pitcher and a hitter, stripped of all strategy and adjustment and preparation and psychological warfare, was exactly that simple. One man threw a baseball. Another man tried to hit it. Everything else, the scouting reports, the pitch sequencing, the adjustments between at-bats, the games within the game, was built on top of that fundamental transaction. And Ryan, in 1974, threw the ball in a way that made the everything else largely irrelevant. Because when the ball moved the way Ryan's ball moved, the strategies and adjustments were not enough. You tried to hit it, you missed. That was the whole thing. Winfield had a Hall of Fame career, 3,110 hits, 465 home runs, 12 All-Star selections, a World Series championship in 1992 with the Toronto Blue Jays. He faced Ryan multiple times over the years that followed 1974, got hits off him, had good at-bats, improved against him as he improved against every pitcher he faced over a long and excellent career. Ryan never owned him the way that first game suggested might happen. But Winfield never forgot that first game, never forgot the 3 strikeouts, never forgot the moment he turned toward the mound and Ryan, already focused elsewhere, gave him that sentence. Not because it was the worst day of his career, but because it was the most honest. Because a 27-year-old pitcher standing on a mound in California looked at a 22-year-old outfielder and said the truest thing that could be said about what happened between them every time they faced each other. I throw the ball and you try to hit it. No mythology, no mystique, no elaboration. Just the thing itself, stated plainly, by the man who did it better than anyone who ever lived. Nolan Ryan threw baseballs for 27 years, 5,714 strikeouts, 7 no-hitters, numbers that will not be approached in any foreseeable future by any pitcher in any era. Writers and analysts have spent decades trying to explain what made Ryan different. The fastball, the longevity, the conditioning, the mentality, the specific combination of physical gifts and personal discipline that produced a career unlike anything the sport had seen. All of those explanations are accurate. All of them contribute something real to the understanding of what Ryan was. But Dave Winfield, walking back to a dugout in 1974, with 3 strikeouts and 1 sentence in his head, had the simplest explanation. Ryan threw the ball, and you tried to hit it. And sometimes, often, you couldn't. And that was the whole thing. That was always the whole thing.